I'm Joanne O'Neill, and currently I work for the ARC of King County and have for quite a few years. But I came to this arena, so to speak, because I have a son who just turned 40, and he has multiple physical disabilities and some intellectual disabilities, although I think he hides a lot.
I'm Janet Adams. I work for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. I've done that for the last almost 12 years. Before that, I worked in the community, leading the Community Advocacy Coalition, the Advocacy Partnership for 10 or 12 years. And then before that, 50 years ago, almost in August, my daughter was born with a developmental disability. And so I've been part of the scene for a long, long time, and part of trying to make things better and to work the way they ought to work.
Okay, I'm Margaret Lee Thompson, and 44 years ago, my son Dan was born, and he was a person with Down syndrome. We lost him 8 years ago because of a terrible heart condition that could not be corrected when he was born. And I've lived in 4 states as Dan's mom, and I have spent my adult life trying to make social change for people with developmental disabilities. I started the Parent Coalition here in Washington State, in King County, and we'll be talking about more than that, but it's basically organizations that are interested in giving good information to families and to teaching advocacy. And so all 3 of us have been in the middle of this for 22 years, something like that, in this part of it, right?
Mm-hmm, at least.
Yeah, maybe 23, yeah. Okay. Okay, I guess that's mine because I was the first Parent Coalition coordinator. How do they start and how do they grow? Well, when we moved here, Dan was in high school. He was at 17. And I had learned fighting the school districts in Texas and working in Wisconsin with school districts that getting a group of people together is probably really smart. I've been a part of parent groups that didn't know they were parent groups who were meeting during Special Olympics on the stands while our kids were practicing. But anyway, I decided to start a parent group in the high school in the Lake Washington School District where we live. And I got the okay from the teacher and I got the okay from the principal. And I decided that we needed to learn about the adult service system. And at that point, this was 1987, 88, and the adult service system as far as day programs and employment was closed. It was just plain closed. And it was very unusual if anybody got services during the 80s. There was just no funding. So I just started getting speakers coming in to inform the families. First of all, the teacher let me call all the families, and we had a really good, I would say, every monthly meeting there was at least 12 to 15 parents there, and there was, I think, 22 in the class, so it was pretty good. I think that was pretty good attendance. And we just started learning about the system. I invited a case manager. I invited the head of the county. I had a personal agenda that I wanted Dan to work, so I started inviting different vendors to come. And I invited Joanne. This is how I got to know her really well, is because she was running another parent group in the East Side that was over about housing and adult issues and all those kinds of things. And she had done a really good job bringing people together. And so we just started deciding that we were going to, this parent group, we were going to go move ahead. So I found out from the high school teacher that really who was in charge was the counties if you wanted employment services. It was, and by this time the parent group had decided we were going to focus on jobs and not everything, just jobs. And so I started showing up at the county board meetings, and believe me, I was the only person there on public input, and they had it at the very end of the meeting. And I'd get up every month and say the same thing. Dan's ready to work. we've tried to help him. He is just really got a good work ethic, and he wants to work, and he's getting all these experiences, and there's no funding. And so finally, I did ask if there could be some kind of a task force that we could get together, and so one of the county board members agreed to be a part of that, and they brought it together, and I took my list, and away we went. So now, sometimes I would bring parents with me to those county board members meetings, and so that they could tell their own stories, so the board members and the county could hear. And then we started off talking to legislators, because they were the ones that hold the money, and I'll be glad to talk about that when you get to that point.
I think it's really important to add to this that one of the reasons the parent coalitions, as they began to form, and Margaret Lee's formed organically, as you can see, is that Margaret Lee began to reach out to other organizations that were doing it. So, for instance, I was never involved as a parent coalition member. I've never been part of a parent coalition, but where I started from, we'd lived in 6 different states around the West, and by the time we hit Washington, Sherry was in high school age, and we lived in White Salmon, Washington. She was the only person with a disability in the high school, and they didn't know what to do with her. And so what they did is she was at school in the morning, and she went to work at Head Start in the afternoon. None of us knew what an important thing that was for her. So she came out of high school with a job recommendation. It was just when WISE was beginning to really put some emphasis and work on supported employment, and she was a poster child. So we moved to Clark County, and she had a job. Mary Strelo, who was the county coordinator there, had actually met us when we were White Salmon, and she had a job almost immediately. And I was asked to be on the county board. And when I went on the county board, I looked at my life, I looked at her life, and I thought, well, Sherry's got a job. She's living with us all as well. Is that working for everybody else? And then what I found is that wasn't true. There were thousands of people without services, that there were people in institutions who belonged in the community and having the opportunity to move ahead. And so as a county board member, we came to the legislature. It was brand new, first time I'd ever done it, and we were basically patted on the head, and they said to us, nobody else is talking to us about it. Go home and see if you can find others. So we went back to Clark County, and we said, okay. So we said, let's get all the county boards together, and let's see if we have the same issues. And so when we pulled people together across the state, nobody listening to this would be surprised. People wanted jobs, they wanted housing, they wanted a life, they needed transportation. And so we began to try to focus on something that made sense, and employment made sense. And about that same time, Margaret Lee was presenting a little conference that I went to, and as she talked afterwards, I said, we need to get to know each other. We need to start working together. And then we began this long history of, we lived about, 150 miles apart?
Yeah, you were south and I was north. We had no funding for mileage. We had no funding for long-distance phone calls.
No, we took it all.
We just started going to Olympia
and we didn't know
them.
who to talk to either. So we'd spend time on the phone saying, now, let's see, we need to learn about budgets. Who do you think we talk to? And so
I said, well, that would be my senator, because he's head of the budget, Dan McDonald. And I said, I could probably start talking with him. And then we found out it was Gary Locke.
That's right.
In the House.
So then we got to know it. And slowly we worked together. And then we realized for us to have power, we needed to expand. And so then we began working with the people that at that time were at the ARC. There was the Washington Assembly for Citizens with Disability was active, and the Developmental Disabilities Council. So then we formed a group there, and we talked about what can we do. We didn't have money. We didn't have PAC money. What could we do? And we decided the only thing we had was people, and that it had to be grassroots. And so then the council put money in to develop the Advocacy Partnership, Advocacy Day, and we just took it and ran with it. And out of that became this wonderful work that was done. And wasn't it 1990 when we had the first money for transition students?
It went back to
2 years.
It went
and
back
forward 2 years.
That's right.
And that was the first.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right.
So it's that.
And about that time, when she's talking about that time, King County decided to they gave me a 6-month grant to see if I could organize parents in King County the way I had organized them in high school. And I thought, 6 months, wow, okay, well, sure, I'll do that. And so
And how many years later?
I had the job 22 years. And so
And Joanne came on board how long ago?
Joanne was always with me, but
Where they actually paid
4
her,
years.
that's what I mean.
After I had my job 4 years, I wanted to go to the ARC to be under their policy umbrella, because I was out there and I was getting. There was actually a couple of times I was kind of scared with different people that were not happy about what I was saying, and so I wanted to be under that policy umbrella. And when I did that, I begged to have Joanne be my assistant, which is silly. I never called her my assistant, but that's the way she was hired. And she was to be over the parent training, which we don't like that word. We like parent education, but it's parent training. And so after 6 months, to go back to my 6 months, I had a 6-month trial, and then I was put into the job. And then 4 years later, Joanne was with me, and we've seen more of each other than we have of our
Spouses.
husbands.
Yes.
For a while.
So the message for parents is that you find your niche, and then that niche can combine and work together. I now, for the last 12 years, have been out of the advocacy world and over into the government world, but it's been such a wonderful opportunity because it gives me a chance to have the parent voice part of all policy decisions. I certainly don't have everything go my way, but I can certainly say and bring the parent and the self-advocate voice to the table and say, have you thought about, did you think about, I can try to get things forward, and it's an opportunity otherwise we wouldn't have. So
I don't think we can. I don't think we can value what that has meant in the Developmental Disability Administration. Just to have Janet there and all the things she knows, and Sherry's experience with employment, and Janet's experience with the county boards, and then going in and carrying that parent voice. I mean, that is huge. And Janet and I have always continued to be on the same team, as has Joanne. We call Janet when we've got a mess, and we kind of problem solve together.
Right. It's absolutely so important that nothing about us without us, that families and individuals, their voice needs to be heard. And any place we can bring it into the scene, whatever it is, makes such a
Joanne, why
difference.
don't you tell about your history at the ARC, starting out with parent to parent, when...
Well, actually, I came to the whole arena a little bit different. Brendan is a little bit younger, only by 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
We only lived in 2 states
Oh,
with him
man.
because we moved here when he was 9 months old. But when I got here, I got connected with the school because they had early intervention in the public schools. And Brendan started when I think he was about 18 months old. He was a little bit later. I was afraid to send him off on a school bus, so I got involved in the parent group at the school in the elementary level, and then went on to the higher grades. We did a project called You Are the Expert, which we brought people together from all over the state and had meetings over there. And the expert was supposed to be the parents, but we were able to work with the college there and do some nice work with that. And then by that time, I went on to the ARC of King County and chaired their project, which was became the Parent to Parent project. And then later on went on to the board, I think, as the token parent maybe, but the parent that was on the board at that point. And then it evolved into the job with what we called AHAD, which was Advocates for Housing for Adults with Disabilities, and then on to the Parent Coalition. So, but Margaret Lee and I worked well together in that she lives, eats, and breathes politics. And
That's true.
I do okay with politics. It's seductive, But
It
when
irritates you, Joanne.
they get to behind closed doors at the end and have to cut deals, I get annoyed with it. So the parent education part was what I really enjoyed. So we worked well together. One of the things that when you talk about your teacher, though, letting you call all of the parents,
That's huge.
it is huge because when Brendan was in high school, our parents' names didn't appear in any high school directory because it seemed like they really didn't want us to come
you
together, and they
can't
may have
now.
been smart.
HIPAA's on.
Okay, so maybe I
in
better
place
say
now.
that a different way. At first invited the parents, and then the ones that came, I would say to them, okay, do you know any of the other parents in this group? And so we finally got our list. Okay, I mean, there's all
Well,
kinds of ways
we
of
had
doing
student directories, but it just didn't have
The parents.
our
yeah.
group.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a key piece is being able to meet those folks because a lot of times, at least in our area, the kids came from all over Bellevue into the one school, depending on what grade level they were. So you really didn't know the other parents, and that being able to meet together was a key piece.
It's one of the hardest issues of today as you try to help families is if they're connected with you or another parent group, you can get information to them. But
Right.
there are thousands of parents out there,
Just
people with
totally.
disabilities that aren't connected. And so there might be things you could help them with, whether it's funding or not, just knowledge, just being part, but you can't get to them
They're
because you don't
home.
have the way to find
They're
them.
home taking care of their kids,
Yeah,
some of
and
them that
so
need the
how
most
do you
help.
find- Yep.
But we used to know all the parents in the Parent Coalition.
We did.
Interviewed them and knew all of them.
Well, hopefully they're still interviewing. I mean, we usually
They
interviewed
are.
everyone. It was not a newsletter model. It was a grassroots model, and so that one of us needed to know every single person, and we didn't want to be asking the birth to 3 people to be in there advocating for senior family services. We needed to have that kind of figured out, and I think we did a pretty good job of that.
It's advocating in your self-interest is what.
The other thing
makes
I'm
a
sitting here looking at, and I know we all have college degrees. You're an RN, and you and I both got bachelor's degrees, and that's something to be grateful for. I mean, not everybody our ages were getting, women, not every one of them were getting degrees. I mean, it's something to be grateful for. And I think I think the 3 of us just wanted to move forward and do something. I certainly didn't know when I was at the University of California in Washington that I was going to be ending up as an advocate for people with developmental disabilities. I mean,
I didn't even know anybody with a
I didn't
developmental
either.
disability until
I'd never
my
met
daughter
one.
was born.
I'd never met one. I'd never met a person with Down syndrome. They were just hidden. And my high school class in Southern California was 703. I mean, this was not rural.
I knew them because in
Oh, yes.
Illinois, where I grew up, we had the state school for the mentally retarded, and there were 4,000 people there. There was a small private school, but no one was integrated. No one was integrated. They
Tell them
were
about
out
going
there.
with your dad.
Oh, my dad had a contract to fit shoes out there, and I would go out to the state school. So my background or feelings about that was a little. It was scary. They would sedate the folks who lived there so much when they would come into the store to get shoes, they would just literally fall out of the chair. So it was quite. They closed that school. They graduated everyone, and it's now a prison. Although I think it was a prison before, so in its own way.
Well, I know the doctor at first did not even want Dan to live. He said, let's not do this surgery. We'll just take care of him here in the hospital. I mean, I was a first-time parent, 23 years old. Man, it was awful. And I think that maybe is the start of what I
Made you
decided.
so determined.
Yeah, I think it is. And it was a bad, horrible thing, but it was a good thing. And then we had to go out to Rainier to have his karyotype done, which shows that you have an extra chromosome. And my husband was getting a PhD in genetics. He could have done it, but we had to go out there. And I know things have changed, but I had nightmares for 10 years after that. It was awful to go out there. However, I did notice something. I did notice that many of the people with Down syndrome were unpaid staff. I noticed that they were wheeling people to appointments. I tried to talk to some of them because Dan was just in my arms, tiny baby. And I would try to talk to them. He said, I remember one gentleman said, I can't talk now. I've got work. And off he went, and they were doing this, and some of them were kind of sweeping and everything. And I thought, okay, this is good. The other thing that I thought was really good was my husband is the oldest of 4, and a younger brother has cerebral palsy. And his younger brother was never supposed to do anything. I mean, I met his brother when he was 11 first, and it's quite a bit younger brother. And he now has an MSW, and he's a case supervisor in developmental disabilities in the state of California. And, Lauren had grown up with helping with therapies and all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, that was a big thing for me because I had no experience. And Lauren just kind of picked it up. My husband's Lauren, and he picked it up and said, okay, let's get going. We're not going to leave our baby in that place. So let's get going.
Don't you think expectations are so important?
Oh, boy.
We grew.
There were none.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
But until parents have the ability to get these expectations, sometimes I think that's what stands in the way. When my daughter was growing up, like I say, we lived all over the West. I didn't even know there was a division of developmental disabilities till Sherry was 18. I had no expectations except that she was just going to grow up like everybody else and be able to do it.
I didn't know there was a division either until he was 17.
And then when I did know and I came into this world of expectations, they were telling me the best thing for her would be a large group home and a sheltered workshop. And it's like, no way. I mean, we're not going to do that. And then Washington State, of course, had Ellensburg conferences, and my county coordinator down in Clark County, Mary Strelo, just really promoted her board being very, very active, and so she would sponsor us to go. And when I went to Ellensburg, it changed Sherry's in my life because the world opened up, and I listened to David Mank, and I listened to others talk about the possibilities out there, and her life changed for the better because I now understood. And when somebody said to me, well, the best she can do is this, then I don't believe it because I know there's something better out there.
And the 3 of us would go to Ellensburg together. Yeah. And I mean, we were quite a team back then because our kids are all still in school.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
But you're right. I mean, no expectations. And
it's interesting, though, the difference just in 4 years. In Brendan's and Dan's age, and coming into the system here with the early intervention beginning at that point, even though he wasn't a baby going in, he did go to the at that time it was the Child Development and Mental Retardation Center. It might as well have had neon flashing lights on that, but that he only got occupational and physical therapy there. And one of the things that one of the therapists coming from a nursing background, in rehab nursing of all things, one of the therapists said to me as I was asking her, well, what do I do at home? What should I do for him? And she said, be his mom. And that was really a gift at that time. But there was a huge difference. And I think, too, the other thing is you need to mourn the loss of the child you expected to have. Of all of those, they'll be president, they'll be Miss America, whatever the expectations are. When you come to terms with that, then you can move forward with the child that you have.
With the expectation for this child, what's going to make a success of their life.
And it was
not
always
what I think is you don't have to go to college, you don't have to do these things. You just have to have a happy, productive life, and how do you make it happen?
But it was treating them like the others and speaking to them like the other kids. I mean, we never talked baby talk, we just talked.
Okay, funders would be the state, don't you think?
Don't
Providers.
you think as you meet people where they are,
Yeah.
you learn their self-interest early on when we all got started. There was a series of workshops being done about community organizing and how to do it that we took. Did you take it
Yes.
too?
Oh my gosh, that was something, wasn't it?
It was really hard.
People coming
hard
out of
message.
Chicago, and I just
But the message I learned, and I've used my entire life career, is you find out where people's self-interest is and where your self-interests match. You work together. You don't become upset if they have other interests. You don't let them hurt you personally if they only believe in one little piece. But you find people with like minds and you work together, and that's how you, in my mind, how you get to where you need to go.
And that's not judging. It's looking
No,
at other
it's just-
parents
it's
and
just
not
look-
judging
yeah.
where they are at
right,
that
because
point.
they're going to
But-
do whatever they're going to do, and you respect that. But in this area, maybe
Right.
you can work together for something.
And that really is really true, that whole thing about self-interest, because when you get to going toward the funding, you're talking with elected officials. Well, elected officials means that's public, and they're using the public dollars, so they need to have their eyes wide open to people of all branches of our society. And I think you can find self-interest in elected officials. You just plain can, and it's actually kind of fun. It's nice, and they like it, and it's clear that people with developmental disabilities are not just Republicans or not just Democrats. I mean, they're all over the map. It's people who are low income to people that are high income, and it's people on the east of our state and the west of our state, and it's people that have education and people that don't, and people that have immigrated. They all have, as a common thing that we've learned, is we all come together with that. And legislators have, in the state of Washington, they are very bipartisan about developmental disabilities. There's been a few times when they've even worked together. And there's other
Been a
times,
lot of times.
yeah, there has been, hasn't there? And there's been a time they tried to one up each other in the last day, and it's fine with us. I mean, it's just fine. And it's also been real tough when they couldn't fund us, and they felt it. So
Because they've met our sons.
that's
and daughters.
exactly right.
They know who they are. We
So that's another
consciously
key. Get to know them on a
Yeah.
one-to-one basis.
We have consciously even taken pictures of our kids and saying, when you're looking at budget numbers, look at this face. Because it's easier to cut a number than to cut a story.
And many of those legislators have those pictures up in their office, on their little bookcases, and I don't care. That's fine with me. Right?
And we know which legislator has something in their family that
That's
is
right.
akin to
We
what
have learned
do.
that, and we find we can tell you today, and we could tell you 20 years ago, who's got a family member with developmental disabilities, or an uncle, or an aunt, or a next door neighbor, because we try to find it all out. And sometimes we find out the legislative aides have
Yeah,
connections,
right.
and
One thing we learned early on, too, when we first began organizing and trying to figure out what we could do, we were talking about the unserved, which is this huge group, which is now the no paid services caseload. And it's too much for people to comprehend. We talk about it, and it's like this great, huge, huge need. The numbers are so big, we couldn't get anywhere. So we strategized. We said, okay, what can we bite off that's small enough that they can get their hands around and they can actually do something? And that's when transition was born. That's what we bit off the first time, is let's go after this. We could make the argument it stopped the bleeding. People are the most ready to go to work that they'd ever be. They're going to lose those skills. It's going to save money for the state. And we could make enough of an argument that they bought it. And so that, I think we've done that with family support. We've done it with a lot of other things over the years.
And I think you're right, and I think the county coordinators really helped us with that.
Oh, absolutely.
They picked that up, and both down in Clark County and up here in King County, they picked that, and it was looked at as a doable thing, and it was good because the families could get together. They weren't. They came together as the school rather than being dispersed all over the county, and it's really seen some vigor in that. But I do want to say something about the unpaid services, though. There are now somewhere between 15 and 16,000 people that have no services, and they don't even have a case manager anymore. They can call a 1-800 number. And those people have the same disabilities as people that are in the institutions that are getting paid $200,000 a year. I mean, taking services at $200,000. People who are in residential services, people who are living with in their families that have some respite, and their sons and daughters have employment services. There is no difference between these people. They just weren't at the right age when there were services open. And so we have, I mean, it's like out of about 40,000 people, there's somewhat, let's just say there's 15,000 people that have nothing. It is horrible. And that we're not the only state like that. These people see they're getting better. One of the nice things is email, and Twitter, and Facebook, and there's email groups I know in King County that bring the autism folks together, bring the Down syndrome folks together, bring the different school districts together. I mean, there's just all kinds of things. I mean, it's just absolutely incredibly wonderful that has brought, tech has brought so many people
yes.
to
the new social media.
Oh, it's just great.
A whole new world.
It's just a whole new world because we were using just the telephone.
And the advocates right now are doing a wonderful job at the legislature of making the legislature aware of the fact that this group is there. I expect not all the need, but I expect that there may well end up being some of that chunked out to provide some services.
Oh, that's
Don't
so.
know if it will for sure.
Well, do you know anything you
I
want
know
to tell the
they
camera?
No,
Okay.
no, and take that out.
Well, the other piece of that is how we started with this, or how we work with the legislature in the smaller counties, so more rural counties, versus King, which had so many. So we started out with coffees, and we still have individual meetings around specific things. But then in King County, we had to bring them all together at once in a forum, and a couple of other counties have done that.
Yeah,
So
the county coordinator, Ray Jensen, and I made that decision because if you've got 48 legislators and they each have opponents, and some of the opponents won't even meet in the same room with each other, and some of the districts have bipartisan, a couple of Republicans and one Democrat, you can't do it. You just can't do it. You can't do that many coffees. So, but in the smaller places, that's it. And then I need to tell you that once I got going in King County, I think the first county, and it was probably because of you and Mary Strelo, the next county that wanted to come on board with the Parent Coalition was Clark County.
Right, and then
And they had me come down, and you were there with me. Do you remember that? Well, you were still on the board, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I went, Snohomish County, got out, I guess, along the Association of County.
So those three, and then Yakima had someone.
I think Pierce was next.
That's right.
Pierce was next, and then I just went to each of these places. I went out to Island County. I went, and then others started helping others. But I I called up the county coordinator of Kitsap, which is now the county coordinator of King. And I said to him, I think you should start a parent coalition. Now, that was kind of gutsy, but, and he said, oh, okay, well, fine. And I hadn't heard from him in about a week. He still tells this story. So I called him back and I said, I even know who you should ask. And so he hired her. I mean, you just, you can use humor in some of this stuff. I mean, persistence and
Respect.
But in having, right?
But humor.
But kind of making sure they realize you're not going to go away, and you'd be calling them again.
But it's still collegial. It's not adversarial. It's collegial.
No, yeah, there's a lot of
And
humor.
it's very purposeful on Margaret Lee's
Yes.
part. I would get a call saying, okay, should I be a little Hollywood this time, or shall I take
Do you remember
soft
talking
approach?
to that? Do you remember talking to that Senate? Wasn't it a Senate staffer who had changed their mind on that bill we were working on? And we go into his office, and I mean, we came out of it. I mean, the guy was so nervous, and it was just Janet and I, and we were only a year or two into this, and we
Yeah.
came out of it. And Janet looks at me and she says, "That was like talking to my 11-year-old son. He was so nervous." Do you remember
Yeah.
that? I mean, it's just kind of, I think that the message got out. We're probably not going to go away, and we didn't have anything except our passion in our hearts. I mean, we didn't have, we weren't lobbying because of money. We didn't get any money. I mean, we were there because of what we felt. And you basically, that's deep in your soul. And Joanne and I have talked about this many times. There's nobody that's going to tell us that we don't know what our sons can accomplish. There's just nobody, because nobody knows as much as we know about them. And we'll, fine, we'll lose our jobs. We're not gonna go back on our values. And I think that's huge, don't you? To have the parents involved.
And don't you think the other thing that we've been able to do over the years, when we first started, Washington State, of course, has this model called Advocacy Day. Way back in the beginning when I did the first few years of it. The people that came to Advocacy Day before the Parent Coalitions came on, and then Margaret Lee and, the Parent Coalition, they began to bring their families. Yeah. But before that, who was there for self-advocates? The only ones that showed up were ones that caregivers wanted to have a day's break, and so they'd bring them. And people were afraid of people with disabilities. They wouldn't look them in the eye. They wouldn't.
Do you remember going into the new house? I'll never forget your story about going into the new house building. It used to be called the Institutions Building. It's right next to the Senate building, the Sherbrooke building. And Janet, and it was Sandy Silvera, and you took some people and you went around the back because some of them were in wheelchairs. And the person who was kind of the staff there that was sort of there for safety and everything wouldn't let them come in.
Right, because they were afraid of having people with disabilities.
And there was no elevator. And they needed to get to the second floor, and they just had never had people in there.
Don't you remember there was a funny old elevator that they had to control, and it was a lift more, and they wouldn't allow them into that lift. Yeah. So over the years, as more and more people came and they began to understand how to advocate, the whole tenor had changed, so that by the time I was through doing Advocacy Day and had moved on, legislators just routinely say, it's Wednesday, and they know the families are going to be there. They know self-advocates are going to be there. And I think today there's almost more self-advocates showing up.
That's what I was just going to say. For decades, the progress that was made in the developmental disability system was done by parent advocates. There's no question about it. No question about the movement of I remember when Dan was born 44 years ago, any school district in the United States could have refused services for him. They could just say, no, you're not wanted here. And so a lot of the parents would start little daycares, and then that's how kind of shouldered workshops start, the parents that didn't send their kids to the institutions. But more and more now, the parents are still really involved in it, but there's just this wonderful new movement of our sons and daughters, and some of them call themselves self-advocates, and they've gotten a bill through that takes away the R word. They didn't want anything more with the word retarded. They've gotten a bill that calls accessible parking instead of handicapped. And I mean, they're doing these things about every session, at least every biennium. They get something together.
Because it's a bad session, but otherwise they've.
I think they've done
parents
things.
Used to take the kids. Now they go in buses, and
many of them are more capable folks. But boy, I'll tell you, they are standing tall, aren't they?
Yeah,
and
it's
well
just
received.
A wonderful result.
Eric Mathis, he's wonderful. I mean, he's just wonderful.
Yeah,
and he loves to bring people together.
And he's young, enthusiastic,
good looking.
It's just really
so now
fun.
The kids are bringing the parents along with
this.
This
kind of nice.
I think interfacing with the other parents was the easier piece. I mean, you had to meet them where they were and in their self-interest, but that was the easier piece. Then we did the legislature, but along with that, we had to do the vendors, the people that provided the services for our kids.
Vendors. When I first heard that word, I thought the only vendor I've ever heard of that sells popcorn at the state fair. What's a vendor? So go ahead.
Right. Well,
talk about that.
We used to do an employment conference or training, and the first thing was, what is a vendor? Who are these people? What do they do? And just educating parents on what language to use, because you could call and ask the government, the bureaucracy, for something, and if you use the wrong language, you were likely to get, no, we don't do that. But if you introduce the correct language, then they can ask for what they need.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, it's working with the government, working with employment providers, residential providers, in a way that's collegial and keeps that person with the disability at the forefront.
Yeah.
They're, everything that we do, if we are looking at their needs, their issues first, then we're okay. If we start looking at what's best for the vendor, what's best for the parent, what's best for the bureaucracy, then we're in trouble, I think.
Okay, so one of the things, and Janet is now in the middle of all that, but one of the things that Joanne and I really tried, and I mean, we made a big effort on it, and I think the other parent coalitions have either done it or learned or whatever, and that is that I always state that I'm on the team, and I'm on the team of the state, I'm on the team of the county,
right.
I'm on the team with the teachers, I'm on the team with the providers of service. But I'm on that team, and as a parent, I'm on that team,
Right.
and I want my voice to be heard, and now, as you say, there's self-advocates that their voices are more and more heard. We've all three, I'm sure, have had stories about people early on not talking to our children, just asking us questions in the front of them without talking to them, and I think our self-advocates have really helped with that most people understand that better now. So, but I think the team part is parent advocates and self-advocates can, I call it advocate, but I guess technically you could call it lobbying. And for example, Janet can't do that because she's in the state government and the county government. If I wanted the county director to come to a meeting with me, I had to make a formal request, and then they had to go up their different steps to get the okay for the county coordinator to come with me to a meeting with an elected official. So it's a really important piece.
I think everybody has their roles, and that's why it's not just parents doing it, it's not just self-advocates doing it, it's not just the government passing their bill. It's all of us together, because we can only do our piece. We can only know what we know, and when we all work together, then wonderful things happen. If we work against ourselves, and sometimes we've seen through our years where the advocates have not worked together, where they work against each other, then nothing happens. Because that's when legislators actually love that, because then they don't have to fund you. If you're fighting, they can say, well, we'll do a study. Well, you guys get together and then come back.
It's an easy out.
Yes.
It is, and we've had to learn, for example, around the institutional question, that we really don't tolerate that anymore from elected officials. We don't. When they used to say, well, you guys need to get together, this is just ridiculous, we're not going to deal with this. I've always said, well, we're not going to get together on this. This is our basic values, and we feel very strongly about our sons and daughters being in ordinary places doing ordinary things, and that's what we're working for. And they are very interested in having their sons and daughters very protected and segregated, and we're never going to come together. So you're going to have to deal with both of us.
We won't come together on that in particular.
On that, you're
but
right.
There are other areas that
See,
we
she's
can.
nicer than I am. Yeah, you're right.
And sometimes it's hard to find those because it's so emotional. And I think we've learned over the
but
years.
that's the other piece I think we've learned, and you guys talked about a little bit earlier. It's the one-on-one connection. Early on, the leader of the RHC movement, when I was the head of Advocacy Partnership, which is a long time ago, really, really disliked me, and rightly so,
And
probably,
me.
because I was pretty outspoken. But as he and I got to know each other on a personal basis, we lost that, and I just admired. He was a wonderful man. He had great values, and he was a good man. We just were on other sides of the fence, and so then we could find some things that we could work together on if it wasn't over whether an institution should be open or closed. So I think it's personal relationships is what you talk about, is getting to know, not vilifying anyone because they have a different opinion. Sometimes I think self-advocates and parents have had these little hiccups in the road because, again, it's, well, my parents don't want me to do anything. Parents are working from this era of fear and a worry about that they'll make right decisions, and so not working together sometimes. But I think that's going better now, too. At least from my observation, it appears like the groups are working. And we've done some purposeful things to try to get them to do some trainings together and do some things. But I do think it's just getting to allow, you're a good person and this is what you want. That means if Joanne's a good person, assume she is, and that what she wants is from her point of view the right way too, and then go from there.
But that child-parent issue is normal families.
Right, it is. But
So
then
then-
it becomes more complicated
right.
because you're so much more involved in this child's life,
That's
all their
right.
life,
For
that
so
it just
long.
really complicates. In fact, I think one of the hardest issues facing us right now, the state, that's us, are saying, and I believe it's true, that because of funding, people are going to be living in their family homes longer and longer with their families. So now you're setting up the situation, the school bus stops, you want to have a family who's going to have a young person at home, and we have to figure out how do we emancipate that person as much as
Right,
possible. How do we help them have us, and yet on the other hand, how do we help that family also have as an emancipated a life as possible? And I don't think we've figured that out well yet.
No, I think that was
fear
one
of letting go.
Yeah, it was one of the
Right.
hardest things I did with our son Dan because of his medical needs. He really had a lot of medical problems, and I finally would say to him, because he was very, very good about concrete ideas. He was good. I said, you're an adult. You can make all kinds of decisions. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to talk to you and probably make you mad when it has to do with your health. Okay? And your safety. Okay. All right. You do health and safety. So, I mean, there's different things you can do. It's difficult. I think we know that if Dan hadn't had his health issues, he would have been out living with a couple of his friends. I mean, we would have gotten involved in that, but it was just, anyway, that was just the way it was. Going back to the Community Advocacy Coalition, because we were both part of that, but you basically started it. There's one thing that happened that I don't think would maybe happen just everywhere, and that was we had the support from the director of the division, the developmental.
That's right,
disabilities.
we did.
I mean, she came to every meeting, every month, and if she couldn't come once in a blue moon, she sent somebody. When I was doing all these monthly meetings for the Parent Coalition for 22 years, every October, she would come to ours. And that was getting in the car and coming a long way and just talking to a room full of people that had questions for her. That doesn't happen.
But it was a room full of people, a room full of parents. Probably one of the better attended meetings each year.
But I also think that not only was that wonderful to have that kind of support, because we had other support from central office. I'm remembering of you and some of those trainings that were just for case managers, and they'd let Joanne go, because she was running so much of the trainings in King County. But I was just thinking, it wasn't just so incredible that the division was so responsive. The families in that room, and there were sometimes 70 and 80 people, they all knew the head of the division.
Right.
They knew the head of the county when they'd come. They knew they could email them or pick up the phone, and some of that stuff made each one of those families stand taller. I don't know. Is that a good way to say it? I mean, they knew that there were places they could go, that they could do things, and they knew that decision makers cared about them.
That's really important because, of course, one of the early things we did when we first started the Advocacy Partnership Community Coalition is we found 2 parents in every county in this state to be responsible, to meet with their legislators at home, and to assume responsibility to make sure they were getting information. They were our conduit rather than us just sending out information. It took a ton of time. Poor Margaret Lee, it took
48.
most from her. So she had her 48 people, 96 people she'd identify. And then I did work with the other counties. But what it did is, again, with those parents, it began to build ownership in their county and their legislators. And I think from that is how you begin to really
I never
do
would
best
have.
for
I
the
never
roots.
would have known all the legislators, but we had the forums once a year, and I went over to Olympia. You know, I'm thinking back on. I used to say dozens, but I think I really have taken hundreds of parents
yeah.
over there
Oh,
over the
oh,
years,
absolutely.
every Wednesday.
Absolutely.
And I had a rule. I didn't go unless there was a parent take. I mean, why should I go over there unless there was a hearing
Yeah,
or something?
you always have.
I always, and
Had a
when the
car
people
full.
that worked with me,
And sometimes they're kids.
yes,
with
their
them,
sons or
too.
daughters would come
That's good.
sometimes. Yeah, and that's I would take. That's so fascinating. Taking people over there, some of them very well educated, some of them not educated, which doesn't matter to me, but some of them, they were just astounded that you could go and talk to these people. You could go and you could pull them out of a
And
hearing
of course,
and
if they
talk
were
to
with
them.
Margaret Lee, they got the royal
Well, and we would
treatment.
spend the entire trip down there talking to them about what to expect,
do.
what things that
And don't
might
worry,
come up.
you just tell your own story. We're here for the data. If they have any questions, don't worry about that. We'll take care of that. You just tell them what you need, you know. And we tell them just one thing. You can't take a lot of time. And we get back in the car after the day. I'm telling you, I
jazzed.
never had a bad day in Olympia. I had some awful things told to us and everything, but I never had a bad day. Can you think of that? I mean, there were some
when
rough
I was
times.
locked out of the car in the rain.
Well, okay,
no.
yeah.
But
No.
well, and I remember writing a testimony for my husband for a hearing and having him go down and. You know, he was used to talking to a lot of people. A little bit uncomfortable. It came out of it and says, you know, they put on their pants one leg at a time, just like I do.
Yeah.
And it's getting over the fact that you can
And
not
how-
only speak to people, but you can have an effect. You can have an amazing
And I
effect.
think, don't you think that's what self-advocates have
Oh,
learned?
yes.
As they learned how to do it and we were able to teach about how one idea and here's your information, that feeling of power has transferred, and it's why that has just grown such as it is. They were in my office, People First Presidency, probably 3 weeks ago. They were up for the big rally.
Oh, yeah.
And so they were really jazzed about the rally, and they were saying how there were about 700 people there and how excited they were. And I was telling them that way back when, in the dark ages, I did the first rally, and it was in the rotundas where we did it. And I still remember the nightmare I had the night before that we all showed up at the rally, and there were no legislators there, and the place was empty. And then it turned out well, but I still remember that nightmare about will this work or not. Now it's turned into this huge endeavor that they just enjoy so much. So
That's all right. I had to endure years of Margaret Lee saying before the forum, do you think anybody will show up? And then we had standing room
Yes,
only for
absolutely,
years, and she
for
finally
years,
stopped saying
yeah.
it.
I
So
know, but it's
we
so
went
much
from
work.
one ballroom to two ballrooms to three
ballrooms. That's
Yeah.
true.
Right.
Yeah, and everybody showed up. That's
They all showed
true.
up.
I just think our sons and daughters learn so much. I know that Dan would never take off work to go to Olympia. No, he was going to go to work. But he would show up at all these things like the picnics and the forums and everything. And I would come home, and whoever was taking the photos, I get all these photos the next day or the next week, and there was Dan with all these legislators. He marketed himself. I mean, he felt good about it, you know.
Give him
It's
the
a-
microphone.
I know. Sometimes I think about when Dan was born and they didn't want him to live, and they wanted us to put him in an institution. And then I think about what we went through in the state of Texas in the schools. And I just think about all those things. And then I think about Dan's life of graduating with a job in 1990 and working for 14 and a half years at Microsoft. look at the difference between the way that started out when he was born, and look what he did. And he was a pretty good reader. He also he's the best work ethic in our family. You ask his siblings, they'll agree with that. I mean, he liked to work, and he loved that job, and he was good at it. And he was in the mail room, and he liked things organized. And boy, if that isn't a good job skill to have if you want to be a mail sorter. So I just think that is kind of a 36-year transformation from people were hidden or at least segregated when I was growing up. I didn't know anybody, and to where his life and the social change that went on there. And sometimes I'm just absolutely dumbfounded about it. I'd like to talk about Professor David Mank at Indiana University saying, "You want friends? Get a job. You want something to do every day? Get a job. You want to make some money you can spend? Get a job." I mean, he has this 4 or 5 or 6 things, and it's so true. And it's no different for our sons and daughters. And then yet, it's sort of like we and they had to prove that to people. And now, Joanne, Brendan's one that you really should talk about.
Well, I watched Dan go to work, your Dan, and Brendan is in a power wheelchair. He doesn't have a lot of really useful language. He recognizes numbers, colors, letters, but doesn't really read. And the school really didn't think that he could work other than sheltered work. And so we started pushing in the school to get him out and get him doing a little bit more. But and so he started on a little piece of delivering mail at Group Health Hospital. And I, fortunately, didn't understand that he was only delivering to one site and bringing it back, which was good. That I didn't know that, because I was braver than I would have been otherwise. And we videotaped him because he couldn't talk about how much he wanted to work. We knew he wanted to work. We knew he would like that. We also knew how bad it would be if he graduated to nothing. And so
For him.
For him,
Yeah.
and therefore for us,
Yeah.
he would just literally fold over like a flower. If he'd get warm and bored, he'd fall asleep. So we started pushing for that, and anyway, he got a job at Valley Medical delivering mail, and went through that whole process of learning his route. He has a wonderful memory. He has a great smile. He's very likes people. And he got the job, and it's now 19 years later.
That's amazing.
But I remember, because we didn't have access to transportation to drive him to work for the first 18 months, I drove him. And now he doesn't understand getting the paycheck. He has what he needs. He gets his meal, he has his TV. He's a happy guy. So getting that money is not, I don't think, makes that connection. And we tried a variety of different rewards when he did a good job, which he always did a good job, so it didn't make much sense. But when I was driving him, the closer he would get to the hospital, the more excited he got.
I actually have been in the van once when that happened.
He loved it. He just loved it. And his sisters, who were younger, watched him get a job. So the expectation that they had in their lives was different, and they each have their challenges. But the one thing was, when he was filmed a couple of years ago for the Office of Disability Employment Policy, we wondered a little bit how he would do, knowing there would be a film crew there to film him. And I warned the bus driver, and she didn't pay much attention to me. I think she was more shocked when he got there than Brendan was. But Brendan got off the bus, and he kind of looked around, and it was like, okay.
Here I am.
The only problem he had was repeating a task when he'd already done it. It's like, I've done that, why do I have to go back? But he loved it, and he loves his work.
Be sure to tell people that was the Federal Department of Labor, so they understand.
Yeah,
They came
so filmed him and put him up on their website, which was really exciting.
yeah, really.
For Sherry, I think the most important thing a job has done is for her self-image and her feeling of self-worth. She's not an only child. I have 12 children, and as the others have left home and gone on to college, that's kind of a hard step. Once she was working, what Sherry would say is, I'll help pay for your college. I'll take you out to lunch if it's dinner time. She has no concept of money. She's like Brandon. Her money, the amount of it makes nothing. The fact that she's earning something and that she's a working, contributing person is all she needs, is that feeling that whoever it is, she's just really cute. If anybody needs anything, if I had a car, I'd give it to Benson. Maybe I can help him buy one. If I had this, or I'll help you go through college. And that has just made the whole difference in her life. She doesn't feel like a dependent person,
She's
that
valued.
we're doing everything for her. She feels like a woman who can make decisions. She'll buy things at the store. She has no idea how much they cost, and lots of times they're way more than what she has. But for her, it's her feeling of independence. So there is no way to describe the value of a job in her life.
Dan is the oldest, and Sherry's one of your oldest.
She's second oldest.
Second oldest, yeah, and Brendan's your oldest. So, but I know Dan is the oldest, and as his sister and brother-in-law sister and brother started going into college and stuff, he'd say, John doesn't have any money. I need to. So he paid for them to go to spring training, each one of them, and you know, with his chest out and different things, he'd say, I know, I'm going to call John and see if we want to go to the movie. I can pay for the money, you know. And I mean, it was ordinary. It was wonderful. I mean, it was just, he got the money, but not to the, he would write out all his checks and everything, but he didn't get about how much he had and all that stuff. We didn't go into that detail with him, but was he proud. And when people would get married that he knew, he had to go out and shop and get them a wedding present. I mean, I'm trying to think of other things. He bought every payday we had to go buy stuff, and you know,
Baseball cards.
They're still there. I can't get the kids to go through them, but we have thousands of baseball cards. And I don't want to be a little bit overboard, that I believe Dan knew every card he had, and he knew which box they were in. I mean, if he was interested in something, his memory was as better than mine, you know, and we'd all back off if he made a strong statement on something, because we just know. Anyway, I'm just saying the job. And that I don't want to miss saying how important his coworkers are to him. Yes. And he'd go off with his, Microsoft sweater on and get there. And apparently, oh my gosh! And apparently, all of a sudden, after Dan was there a number of months, people weren't staying long on the breaks because he'd just say. And he would do it sweetly, apparently, because I don't know what happened, but everybody, he kind of tidied that up, but, and he had so many, and he got people taking pictures of him, his coworkers, and then give him copies, and then I got to tell one story, this whole slew of people came to his funeral that were his coworkers, and I never had heard all these things. But one man said to me, "Well, he'd get his work done," and he said, "This was back when they didn't have him working as much as he didn't give him as much to do as he should have had, and that changed." But he said he'd come over to me about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and he'd say, "I'm here. And my work's all done. Do you have some work? And I can learn new things." I'd never heard any of this stuff. And the coworkers that were there, they were in tears, and many of them had moved on, but that's another benefit of Dan's job, is how many people are learning the abilities of people with developmental disabilities. It's another thing, it's another part of social change that I think is so important. So,
Brendan worked at the same place that Dan worked, and when he first started working.
now wait a minute,
was-
Dan is your husband, not
Right.
Dan, my son.
Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
yeah, it's okay.
Thank you. And that's right. And originally, in the beginning, it was, oh, you're Dan's son, and soon it would be to my husband, oh, you're Brendan's father. So it is important
wonderful.
that, but it makes all of our lives, not only the other coworkers and our sons and daughters, but it makes us as parents our lives a little more normal. Brendan goes on a bus to work. Yeah, the bus comes to our driveway. It brings him home to our driveway, but he goes to work every day, and that's a little more normal.
It's
At least
wonderful.
it's the normal I want to see. There's one thing I was thinking of is that the no permanent friends, no permanent enemies that we learned in that community organizing, and that was, I don't know whether I agree with the no permanent friends, because it was kind of keeping that separate, because clearly we have become permanent friends in our organizing, even with some of the other people who are not parents. But the piece that I remembered is no permanent enemies. So we may not do well with the person in one role, but they sort of resurrect themselves again in another role. So I learned quickly to be
Don't burn your
careful.
bridges.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't burn your bridges.
I mean, it's really true.
Really critical.
Well, I don't know. I've had a life that has just been absolutely wonderful, and I do not think that Dan was sent to make me a better person. I don't think stuff like that. But boy, I'm sure I've had such a rich life. I could have never have dreamt of having such a good life. And he affected both of his siblings, and I know it's the same in your families. And we've just had. I wouldn't have missed parenting Dan Thompson for the world, and my husband feels the same way.
I think all of our worlds have been richer because we've done, and we haven't gone our way of being a historian or a nurse or a botanist, but instead we've put all of our efforts together to try to I think what makes people happy in this world is to find something that they can make the world a little bit better. And I think through our children, we've found for us the goal of a place where we can do that. And we've seen in the lives of our children, I wish I was as happy as my daughter is and as contented with life.
And employment is a huge part of them. They're
Employment
part
is
of their
huge.
community.
Her family, her community relationships, all of those are so important. And that's what we want for everyone. And I think that's the piece that drives all of us, because it's still not there for everyone, and there are still many
And the
people that we
variety,
need to
the
get
variety
to
of
families.
people.
Yeah.
It's also good for the family. I mean, we never asked for respite or family support. I mean, I know we had a good family unit and everything, but that employment and going off to a job every day, I mean, my gosh, that's family support. Everybody in our house had a regular rhythm, so big stuff all the way around.
Yeah.
Yeah.